Well, hi, it's a beautiful afternoon and I would rather be outside, but I am going to record the Malachi study so that those of you who missed it can jump in or ease in. First of all, the study is Malachi, and we are going to do it for 8 weeks. And our 8 weeks of study is going to be primarily very slow. I like doing things slow, except when I want to go fast. But what we're going to do is we are going to be intentional about how we look at it and how we tear it apart and do it very with intention purpose. And the first week, which is today, first week we're going to really focus on knowing the background, knowing the story, knowing the definitions. Because when you know definitions, when you understand what each other are talking about, it makes a lot more sense. Like if you go somewhere and they have soda and you're used to drinking pop, which of course some of my friends don't want me to do that anymore. And I am making a feeble effort. I'm making an effort. Won't even put feeble in there. Some days it's non-existent effort. But so definitions make a big deal. And if we don't understand what Malachi meant, what God meant when he talked, we're not going to be able to process it properly because we're going to look at it through our culture's eyes, which for us is Western culture. And for me, it's specifically Minnesota culture, which is a whole different world in itself. But it's the last of the books of the Old Testament. It's the last of the minor prophets. And minor and major prophets don't go by volume or don't go by how important they are, but go by volume. So your major prophets are large works. There's five major prophets, and they're big works. They're like reading Tolstoy's War and Peace, which is a big thick book, versus reading a tiny thin book. It doesn't mean there's less punch in it. It just means there might be less punch, but the punch tastes just as good. Put it that way. I shouldn't have used punch. I should have used soda. So actually, it's pronounced Malachi, and Malachi means messenger. We don't really know if there was a man named Malachi. We don't know if he had a family, if he even existed, or if he was simply someone used as a messenger. But the whole point is he was the messenger and he was God's messenger. Now there's zero facts about him, so we're just going to go as if it was a messenger that had a purpose, because that's what it was. So approximately it was written 400 BC. And let's go back and build some foundations. So Babylon, they had been taken to Babylon. There had been 3 exits basically to Babylon. The first one would have been where Daniel would have went. The second one was, I think it was King Jehoiakim. And that probably would have included Mordecai, as I understand from Esther. And then the third would have been when they actually destroyed the temple. And they were in exile 70 years. And in those 70 years, some amazing things happened. And this is after they came back. So this is about 100 years after they came back. So Haggai came and rebuilt the temple. We know that. Nehemiah had the city walls rebuilt. And though Ezra's not as widely known as some of them, he played a vital role in the spiritual health of the people. He spent his life as a priest, and he served the Israelites during their exile and when they came back to Jerusalem. And approximately 100 years, things changed a bit. Now, my grandma lived almost 100 years, and amazing things that changed in her life when she was alive. She went from no electricity, no nothing, to people walking on the moon. Amazing transformation in her lifestyle, in her life timeline. And you think about back in that day, 100 years is basically 4 generations, and a lot changes in 4 generations. And what had happened was there was a spiritual apathy. They didn't pass down their value system, and they got lazy morality-wise. So what happens during those 100 years? Well, they became like ho-humdrum. When they came back from Babylon, they were so excited, and so they were back in their home country, which always gets you excited. They had a new temple. They were excited about worship, and then they got lax. So basically, Malachi deals with ministry, marriage, and money. And the ministry isn't talking about necessarily the priest ministry. It's talking about how they treated each other, ministering to each other's needs. So then during this captivity, they maintained some really good things. Number one, we don't hear them talking about idolatry at all. They kept free of pagan idols, and they kept Messiah in their worship. think about Daniel and the way he kept his prayer life going. Think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the way they were devout to who God was. Think of Esther. So God was very much present in their lives. And when I was a kid, exile, I thought they were handcuffs and making bricks like in Egypt. But no, they lived a very fruitful life. They were very productive. And so when they were freed from that, they came back and they started life over again back in Judah. And that brings us to Malachi. We have the definitions that we really kind of want to just talk them through. Not going to talk through all of them. Well, maybe. So the first one we talk about Edom and Esau, and that's going to be right away in chapter 1. And that is related to the Israelites. Esau was very prominent in the early Hebrew people. And so they knew that. And Edom is associated with Esau. The priests had the privilege of bringing people closer to God by how they served at the temple. And I think that in itself is huge because we are priests. It's an honor and a privilege to serve people and to bring them closer to God anywhere, not just a temple. And I sometimes don't think of myself as a priest, but we're a holy priesthood. And then there's that defiled food definition. Now, my children would say couscous was a defiled food. It was not what they asked for. They only got it a couple times, and they called it goose poop. And yeah, my kids now they'd rather have normal food. They would have called it, but defiled food was not what God asked for, and so anything God did not ask for became defiled food. And we'll talk about that in some detail. The table of the Lord, Leviticus gives us specifics as to what you're supposed to bring for a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is a pleasing aroma to God. In our culture, we think of sacrifice as, oh my goodness, I got to sacrifice my Saturday afternoon to do this, and I don't want to. It's more of a spirit of willingness than sacrifice is what they brought to God. And if they brought to God what God asked for, not defiled food, then it was a pleasing aroma to God. The governor of Persia, we're going to hear about that. We're going to hear about the governor in chapter 1. The governor was termed the governor because at that time, Persia was ruling Judah. Now, when Persia overtook Babylon and freed them and they came back, Persia took over that whole territory, so they were under Persian rule. So when you hear the word governor, that's indicative of their legislative system, their government. The altar is where sacrifices were made, and that's all a part of the temple. Offering is voluntarily without a percent ascribed to it. So when we talk about tithes, which we'll talk about a little bit later, tithes and offerings, tithes are a percentage. And offerings are above and beyond that. Blemish. Now, this is interesting because a blemish is something that's a problem with what is blemished. So, according to the biblical, it wasn't the best they had. It was lame, it was blind, it had sores, it was not perfect. And what God asked, especially animal sacrifices, was without blemish. Now, I want you to think about that. Just think about that for a bit. We sometimes go to Goodwill and donate. Okay, maybe more than sometimes. But we go to Goodwill and donate, and there's a sign, and I'm not going to say it perfectly, but there's a sign that says, donate to us what you would give to your best friend. Yet, what do a lot of times we do? We don't want it anymore, and it's no good. Instead of burning it in the bonfire, we donate it because somebody else might want what is absolutely worthless to us. And we usually donate what we can't use anymore, but not what's totally useless. And so the blemishes that God talks about, I take and kind of put that back on me. When I offer God my service, my attention, my life, am I offering him the very best? Or am I offering him a blemished Maret? Let's go back to simple things. Am I getting good sleep? Am I keeping myself healthy? Am I at a basically appropriate weight? Am I physically active, which makes me emotionally better? Am I spiritually healthy? When I go to serve and give God, am I giving him the best me? Or am I giving him a blemished me? A tired, a ornery, a frustrated, a not really wanting to serve, just got to put my time in. So that's kind of how I went with blemish. Commandments, they're given by God. The curse was basically the effects of them not giving their best. And the blessings are the benefits of putting God first and allowing him to increase our efforts rather than what we do. We can do it ourselves. We are Americans. We are strong, we're opinionated, and we don't need help from anybody. It's kind of the mantra we all carry about in life. Okay, some of us carry. But what blessings are is if we put God first and let God bless us, knowing that we are the best we can be, we're not offering God a blemished person, a blemished heart, a blemished soul, then God will increase our efforts. We can work all day, and sometimes we can't get done what somebody else can do in 5 minutes. And sometimes we just need to step back and say, God, I'm going to give you the best me I can, and you bless me. And I will stop trying to do it on my own, because obviously I am not as good as the creator of the universe. Really indicative of the fact that they spent their time in Babylon remembering their feasts. And feasts are a special set-aside time with meaning, and they focused on God. The covenant, that's a lasting relationship with our Creator, and it's a promise between God and humanity. Reverent, respecting the holy God and responding appropriately with fear, respect, honor, and obedience. Responding appropriately with fear, respect, honor, and obedience. Now, a lot of times, I don't fear snakes, I just hate them. But I get a little antsy when snakes are around. I fear things going wrong, like Jim was trying to fix the dishwasher, and I'm going, are you sure you're not going to electrocute yourself? I'm fearful of things I don't understand. But now when you know how to handle electricity and you turn off and do that, then there's no fear involved. And some of that is knowing and understanding who God is. We don't fear him as much as we respect him and we understand what he is all about. Injustice is dishonoring others, dishonesty, and unethical conduct to other people. Abomination. Now, that's a big word, and it's not something that probably we talk about at supper time. Although when my kids were young, all bets were off. Tyler and Bailey were just little lawyers going back and forth at each other. So how do you look at the word abomination and explain it? Well, it's something that God doesn't like. And it's something that goes, But I came up with one that maybe will resonate a little better. It's things that make God sick to his stomach. Okay, now follow me. I had an incident about 3 months ago that I was watching something unfold in front of me. I had no control to make it better. I was a witness, and it made me sick to my stomach because I realized partly is we'd been lied to. Things weren't as they seemed. There's nothing I could do about it. And it made me sick to my stomach. I could have thrown up. I was so frustrated, disheartened, disappointed, angry. Just could have made me hurl. Well, that's a word we don't use a lot. So I turned that back to abomination, okay? These are things that makes God sick to his stomach. That sick feeling in your gut when you go, ugh. That's what abomination is. It makes God feel like that. So now I can understand. Putting it in words like that is like, am I doing something? Abomination's a big word. Maybe I'm not doing those big bad things, but am I doing things that make God sick to his stomach? Interesting way to look at abomination. Then we have divorce, and divorce is the separation of a covenant. And it's not just in marriage, it's us separating ourselves from the covenant God has made with us. Refiner, we're melting it down, and we're going to talk about that with silver. Righteousness is being right in the eyes of God and his standards. Now, a lot of times we're right in our own eyes, but right in the eyes of God. To rob is to take away from, or without permission, taking back something. Tithes, we talked about that earlier. That's a percentage that God asks. Offerings are above and beyond. Storehouse was probably reference to the temple treasury and some things that they kept there because they would have had things kept there. Ordinances were rituals and represented religious ceremonies, a lot of the festivals that they had. Then we have the Book of Remembrance. Now, it's only mentioned in Malachi, and it's not given us a lot of information. And in Psalm 69:28, there's some relationship to the Book of Life. But I think of it this way. Many years ago, I started a book. It's about this thick and about this wide. And it's beautiful. It's got a leather binding. I don't know where I got it. But I started going through my life. That's a scary thought. And I started writing down people that mattered. Back to when I was a kid. Some of these people I have known all my life. And I started writing down a book of remembrance about them. Everyone has a page. And I add to it quite a bit. But the other thing I do is I go back and I'm reminded. And I'm reminded and I keep up with those people because of the impact they've had in my life. I don't know if that's what it talks about, but it's peoples whose names are placed whose they reverenced God, and that's how they're remembered. And that's how I want to be remembered, as someone who honored and worshiped God and treated other people kindly and lovingly. Then we have stubble. Now, this is probably my favorite one because we're about ready to make stubble. And in our life, we farm. So Jim's getting everything ready, and he's going to pick corn and combine beans, and there's a difference. And there'll be stubble left over. Now, the stubble means the crop is done. And it just looks useless out in the field. It's just going to rot. They're going to rip it, which means you turn some of the soil over. And they do that because they want that stubble worked in. Now, stubble looks useless, but we need stubble to add nutrient to the ground. So if we think about that, seemingly what's absolutely no use is actually going to go in the ground and put nutrients in the soil for the next year's crop. So in my life, what stubble do I leave behind? What do people look at and see as stubble, or what's left of my life, but yet is nutrients in the ground for someone else following me or someone else growing out of my faith? Law of Moses is the Pentateuch, and Elijah the prophet, it's referred to in Malachi 4:6 that Elijah's hearts will turn the hearts of the fathers and their children to each other, and Jesus revealed that John the Baptist was that fulfillment of that in Matthew. So those are kind of some definitions. Now just quickly, because I talk too much, light bulb moments. So at the end of every study, we'll have some light bulb moments. So how do you see today's culture in Malachi? They were kind of lackadaisical. And we see a lot of our churches becoming lackadaisical. They have church, but their faith is not alive. And then we talk about definitions help define, and what two definitions jump out at your framework to reframe your heart and your actions. So when you think about the definitions, there's a couple that probably jumped out at you. To me, it's the abomination, and it's the other one that how can I not offer people a blemished Maret? How can I offer someone a healthy, emotionally, spiritually, a physically healthy person, so that my presence in their life is a blessing, not a negativity? So as we kind of wrap it up, what definition do I need to improve if it's a part of my life and part of my faith behavior, that being a priest, and having it be a privilege to bring people into the presence of God? And it says priests had the privilege of bringing people closer to God by serving in the temple. Do I take it seriously as a privilege? Do I take it as an honor to be able to teach people, to talk to people, to love people, to serve people? Or am I just doing it because I need to do it? I signed up for this. I said I would teach little kids. I just got to do it. Is it a privilege? Am I coming before people as a privilege? And along with that, am I a healthy priest? Am I a healthy person mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, so that the privilege of bringing them closer to God is actually a privilege, not making their life more confused or turning them away from God? So then in closing, what one thing are you going to take away that you can put in practice? And I go back to that abomination thing. I got to look at my life and see, am I doing something that makes God sick? Am I doing something that is just so disappointing to him and he just gets that pit in his stomach? But also, the whole book of Malachi talks about a spiritual spiraling downhill. And I want to make sure that I don't start a spiral. Now, in the book of Judges, we talked about it. They spiraled down, went back up, and spiraled down like a slinky going bloop, bloop, bloop. And they come back up and bloop, bloop, bloop. I don't want to be like that. I want to be gradually going toward God and not spiraling so that somebody has to stop my spiral and get me back on the road again. So this was lesson 1 of Malachi. Look forward to talking to you again next week.